The pandemic and resulting financial crisis has created a housing crisis here in the city and all across the country. While the state's eviction moratorium has been temporarily extended, New Yorkers who've fallen behind on their rent are far from out of the woods. Áine Duggan is the president and CEO of the Partnership for the Homeless, which seeks to provide programming and assistance to those at risk of homelessness or experiencing it right now. Áine, thanks so much. These are very difficult times for all of us, but particularly for people who are in fear of losing their homes or who have already lost their homes. Now, the city has had quite a problem dealing with homelessness, but it's obviously been exacerbated since the pandemic, and we're suddenly seeing whole encampments of homeless individuals on our city streets. Why is this happening? Are these existing homeless people, or are these new to the homeless existence?
Hi, Roma. First of all, thank you for covering the story, because it is very important. I think what we're seeing at the moment is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's about to come at us, in terms of evictions and family homelessness that we're likely to see in the coming months. One thing that's helpful to remember, I think, for New Yorkers is that the people that we see on the street probably represent about 8% of homelessness in New York City.
Wow.
The vast majority of people experiencing homelessness are on the family side of the system. It's particularly families with young children who are in the shelter system. There's, approximately 60,000 people bedding down in the shelter system every night of the week, 20,000 of whom are children and over 40,000 of whom are in the family shelter. So that really is what the sort of the face of homelessness in New York, if you will, is that of a family with young children.
It's staggering. I understand your organization, the Partnership for the Homeless, offers quite a bit of assistance to these families who have lost their homes. What exactly are you folks doing?
So at the Partnership, the focus is on prevention. We come from the sort of belief system that homelessness is not a necessary problem. It is solvable, and it is solvable by a focus on prevention. And so a huge part of the work right now, and it has increased since the onset of the pandemic, is eviction prevention through rental assistance and mediation with landlords. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the very same communities and individuals and families who were impacted the most by the health crisis are also impacted the most by the pending eviction crisis. And so they've fallen behind because of job loss and so on. They've fallen behind in their rent. We're seeing people come to us with much higher rent arrears than is typically the case. And we're also seeing people coming to us who are not eligible for government assistance or not eligible for the typical assistance that's made available. And the level of rent arrears at this point is at a height that we've never seen before as an organization. And so we are particularly concerned about when the eviction moratorium ends and these families will be faced with certain eviction.
All right, and you mentioned when the eviction moratorium ends. It was just last week Governor Cuomo extended it to September 4th, and just today we learned that the state chief administrative judge has pushed it to October 1st. I'm assuming that supersedes Governor Cuomo's extension, but what exactly does this really mean for these folks? Because eventually the eviction moratorium is going to end and the rent is going to come due, and if people still are out of work, where's the money going to come from? And I foresee mass evictions when the moratorium does come to an end.
So I think some of the numbers can help us understand this problem, right? We have over 1 million people in the city at this point in time who are behind on their rent. And in order for them to be assisted to stay in their homes, we really need the federal government to kick in. That's the bedrock of any solution to this particular crisis. And there is a cry from across the country, advocates, elected officials, organizations, just asking for $100 billion in the next stimulus package for rental assistance. That measure needs to be passed if we're to have any hope of addressing this crisis. But on top of that, the eviction moratorium, essentially without any other assistance kicking in, the eviction moratorium is simply kicking the can down the road.
Right.
However, the eviction moratorium can keep people safe in their housing if we know that there is rental assistance coming at the end of it. I think one thing that we do have control over at the state and city level is making sure that people feel safe and certain. So it's great that the moratorium has been extended once again, but there is a real question mark around why are we waiting until the moratorium is almost up before we extend it? Why are we putting families under that level of stress where they think that they're about to be evicted next week or next month? So, if we don't step in and if we don't extend the moratorium indefinitely until the economy recovers, then we really have to ask ourselves, why are we engaging in that kind of cruelty? Because it is cruel to make those families suffer even more than they already have.
So true. And the economic inequities seem to have fallen hardest on people of color and Latinx communities. Is there anything that can be done to turn things around for them specifically?
So yes, and you can see that it is the same families that suffered sort of the height of the COVID crisis itself, the families who were most impacted by illness and fatalities in communities of color around the city, who are also the most impacted by rent arrears. But really, COVID has just pulled back the curtain on something that we've sort of all known has been there for not just decades, but centuries at this point. And so racial inequity is really at the foundation of housing inequity, not just in New York City, but in the country as a whole. And if we really want to solve the homelessness crisis, then we have to dig in and tackle the racial inequity crisis that is part of our society. And we also know that, if you look at the families in shelter, just as sort of one very glaring example of that housing issue, the vast majority of individuals in the New York City shelter system are people of color. And it is largely women of color with young children. And so if we want to solve that issue, we need to look at the systems that provide economic equity for women of color and their children. We also need to look at ensuring that children who are in shelter continue to have access to school. So one of the programs that the partnership is focused on making sure that children have access to school even while they are in shelter as a way of breaking the generational cycle of homelessness. So all told, you're talking about making sure there's rental assistance so that these families can stay in their homes, and in the long term, making sure that children can stay in school so that they don't become the next generation of people entering the shelter system.
Yeah, we surely hope there's some kind of workable solution for rent relief down the road. Áine Duggan, President and CEO of the Partnership for the Homeless, thank you so much, and we wish you all the best of luck moving forward.